There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes that begging is not love, that chasing is not loyalty, that silence is not weakness, it's a decision. And that's the moment they never expect. They thought he would break down, that he would fall to his knees and ask why, that he would lose himself trying to win them back. They thought they had him emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and for a while they did. Because when a man loves deeply, he doesn't walk away easily. He fights, he stays, he explains, he forgives. He tries harder than he should, even when his soul is tired, even when his dignity is bleeding. He stays longer than he deserves to, not because he's weak, but because he believes in what they had, because he thought loyalty meant holding on. But life has a cruel way of teaching. The ones you never thought would hurt you the most, and they expect you to break. Just like that. But something shifted in him, slowly, quietly. At first, he didn't even notice it. The silence that once crushed him began to feel peaceful. The absence that once stung now felt like freedom. The calls that never came didn't bother him anymore. The fake apologies, the excuses, the half-hearted efforts, they stopped affecting him, not because he stopped caring, but because he started caring about himself more. He remembered the man he was before he was emotionally manipulated, before his kindness was used against him, before his silence was mistaken for permission. He remembered that his value doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it, that his love doesn't lose meaning because someone walked away from it. He remembered that begging for someone to stay is the slowest way to forget who you are. They thought he'd beg, but he didn't. He chose self-respect instead. He chose to let the silence speak. He chose not to chase people who wouldn't even walk toward him. He chose to stay grounded, even as they expected him to crumble. He chose to sit with his pain instead of running back to the same hands that caused it. And in that silence, something powerful happened. He healed, quietly, with no one watching, no status updates, no dramatic goodbyes, just the slow return of a man who was once lost in trying to please everyone but himself. He began to do the little things again, like walking without checking his phone, like sleeping without waiting for a reply, like smiling not for anyone else, but because he survived what was meant to destroy him. He stopped explaining himself, stopped proving his worth, stopped trying to fix what didn't want to be fixed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Not because everything was perfect, but because he no longer needed people who couldn't appreciate him when he had nothing left to give. He no longer needed validation. His peace became louder than his pain. His silence became stronger than his need for closure. They noticed, not immediately, but eventually, they noticed that the man who once reached out first no longer did. That the man who once apologized just to keep the peace was now unapologetically distant. That the man who once lowered his voice to be accepted now stood tall in his truth. And suddenly, he became unfamiliar to them, not because he changed, but because he returned to who he truly was. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter, he didn't seek revenge. That's what scared them the most. He just became unavailable, unreachable, unshakable, and in a world where everyone expects a reaction, his silence was deafening. They thought he'd beg, but he didn't, because he realized that anyone who makes you feel like you have to prove your worth isn't worth your presence. That real love never needs to be chased. That if someone can live without you, let them. That if someone chooses to walk away, let them walk. You're not here to convince anyone of your value. You're here to live it. He started showing up differently. In his energy, in his presence. He walked into rooms with quiet confidence. Not because he wanted to be noticed, but because he was no longer hiding. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Because there's something powerful about a man who's been through hell and still smiles. Something unshakable about a man who's lost everything and still walks with dignity. Something unstoppable about a man who no longer fears being alone because he's finally at peace with himself. He stopped reacting, stopped explaining, stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding him. Not because he gave up, but because he outgrew the need to be understood by those who refused to see him. He realized that some people only value you when you're quiet, when you're giving, when you're breaking yourself to build them. But the moment you choose yourself, they call it selfish. The moment you say no, they call you cold. The moment you walk away, they act like you were never there. And that's okay, because he didn't walk away to be seen as a hero. He walked away because peace isn't something you can beg for. It's something you choose, and he chose it over and over again. They called it pride, but it was protection. They called it distance, but it was healing. They called it silence, but it was clarity. Because he knew that if he stayed, he'd lose himself completely, and nothing. No love, no memory, no shared history is worth losing yourself for. He started choosing differently. People who poured back into him. Environments that respected his boundaries. Moments that made him feel alive instead of drained. He started building, quietly, silently, brick by brick, alone if he had to, with no recognition, no applause, just purpose. And when people tried to come back when they realized he wouldn't beg, they found a man they no longer had access to. Not because he hated them, but because he had outgrown the version of himself that tolerated what he didn't deserve. The door wasn't closed in anger, it was closed in peace. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is choose not to return to what broke him. He stopped posting, stopped proving, stopped waiting. He learned that not everything deserves a response. That healing doesn't need an audience. That strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm done." And in that quiet decision, he rose, not above anyone, but into himself, into the man he was always meant to be, a man with scars, but no shame, a man who remembers what it felt like to beg emotionally, and swore never again. A man who knows his worth and refuses to negotiate it. So if you're listening to this, and you've been waiting for someone to come back, if you've been checking your phone, replaying old conversations, doubting yourself, asking what else you could have done, let me say this to you, you don't need to beg to be chosen. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to keep proving your loyalty to people who only show up when it's convenient. You are not hard to love. You just loved. People who were too broken to receive it. You are not too much. You are just too real for people who settled for surface. Stop waiting, stop chasing, stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. Walk away, and when you do, don't look back, don't text. Don't explain, don't beg. Let your silence say everything your words no longer need to. Because when a man chooses self-respect, he becomes untouchable. They thought he'd beg, but he didn't. He chose himself, and that's what changed everything.